You know?
I do have a vote up
Test.
too, an e-scribe
Okay.
test
Sound
vote.
check test. Sound check test. Meeting live.
Line went at lightning speed. They're just on other business, so I switched over to here.
Perfect. That's great.
Mr.
to
Mayor,
have you
we
here.
are ready to go and we are live.
All right. Thank you very much, and welcome members of council and anyone else that's tuning in and staff to this special council meeting. I'd acknowledge that the city of Hamilton is situated on the traditional territory of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. And we further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase, 1792, between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, North America, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website, and that the presentation and reports considered at this meeting are available on the city's website, and that members of the public can contact the clerk's office to acquire documents in an alternate form. As well, and a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during our council meeting, and members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which we will adhere to during this meeting. So, Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda, please?
Good morning. Yes, Mr. Mayor. There's one added presentation 4.1A to item 4.1 of the agenda.
Great, thank you. And then can I have a motion then to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Nan. All in favor electronically if you're dialed in already, hopefully. If you're not on eScribe, then give me a thumbs up or down. Hopefully you're all on eScribe. Thumbs up from Councillor Nan, thank you. Anyone else? Thumbs up, Councillor Pauls, thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
Not seeing Councillor Wilson on the screen at the moment. And I do appreciate your attendance this morning. We thought it was important, an important fast-moving issue that we needed to apprise members of council on, and obviously get some direction in terms of what advocacy work we're going to do to share some concerns with the province. Madam Clerk, did that pass?
I'll have Janet close the vote. Councillor Wilson isn't present in the meeting.
Oh, I
Yep.
have closed the vote. It carried 11-0.
Thank you. And are there any declarations of interest or conflicts? Not seeing any. Thank you. Communications. There is one communications item, and we are, I think, going to refer that to the consideration of item 4.1. Councillor Nan, a motion to do that, please.
Certainly, that the correspondence from the Honourable Kate Manson Smith, Deputy Minister, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, respecting the More Homes for Everyone plan, item 3.1, be received and referred to the consideration of item 4.1, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Clark.
Thank you. All right, any comments or questions on it? If not, electronic vote to do that, please. And I will look for thumbs. Hopefully everyone's on eScribe at this point.
Councillor Pauls?
Thumbs up, Councillor Pauls? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thumbs up.
That carries 11-0.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Nan, a motion to move into a committee of the whole, please.
Certainly, that council move into committee of the whole to consider the committee reports, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Partridge.
Thank you. Any comments on that? Not seeing any. All in favor? Electronically, and I will take thumbs up from those that, Councillor Pauls, thumbs up.
Yes, but it's not coming up on my e-scribe. I am on e-scribe, but
Okay,
it's up.
we'll keep working on getting it active for you, but in the meantime,
Thumbs up.
I'll look for your thumb. Thank you.
Carries 11 to nothing.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So staff report, item 4.1, City of Hamilton's response to the Provincial Bill 109, More Homes for Everyone Act. I'm going to first turn it over to Jeanette Smith, City Manager, who will then turn it over to Jason Thorne for some comments, and then we'll have a presentation on the report. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Good morning, members of council. We appreciate that you and all of council have some concerns related to the newly proposed legislation, in particular as it relates to housing availability, its impact on city finances, and our ability to provide a high level of service to development applicants. I can confirm that staff from planning, legal, government relations, communications, and others have met to review the details of what is being proposed and their implications. And I do want to thank the team for pulling the report and presentation together so quickly for the special council meeting today. Those details and our understanding of what they could mean to the City of Hamilton and all Ontario municipalities will be detailed by members of General Manager Thorne's team. So I'll now turn it over to Jason Thorne, General Manager of Planning and Economic Development, to start off the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette, and good morning, Mayor and members of Council. So I'll just give a couple of quick introductory remarks. So Council will recall it was actually at your last meeting that you had a report in front of you and the city provided comments on what was the report of the task force on housing affordability. And in those comments, there were some recommendations that that Council supported, some that the city did not support, and others where there was requests for some more information and clarity as to what the recommendations were intended to do. The province has now introduced Bill 109, which implements a few of those recommended actions, but also proposes some changes that, in staff's view, are different from what was in the task force report. So you have our staff report in front of you today, and we will have a brief presentation for you that includes an overview of the bill, some areas where staff has some concerns, and I think importantly, some aspects that City of Hamilton has already implemented in order to address some of the housing supply issues and to streamline our development approvals. Because it is notable that both in the task force report and in this bill, there are some changes that have actually already been implemented in the City of Hamilton. So as you'll hear, the changes do potentially have some very significant impacts on local land use decision making. These include expanded decision making authorities for the province, what we would see as a higher likelihood of more planning matters resulting in appeals. There are financial impacts on the city. There is the potential for shifting more of the costs of growth away from developers and onto the general taxpayer, as well as reducing some opportunities for things like public consultation and other aspects of the review process, such as design review and other matters. So as Jeanette said, I also want to thank staff for pulling this together very, very quickly. Especially Planner Tiffany Singh, who you're going to hear from in a moment and who will provide the presentation, but also to Steve Robichaud and his team, Heather Travis, Christine Newbold, Anita Fayback, Ken Coit, also staff in legal and the building division and finance and some of the other divisions that had to very quickly come together to feed into the preparation of this report. And particularly also want to acknowledge our chief planner, Steve Robichaud. Members of Planning Committee will know that in addition to sort of leading the city's response on matters like this, Steve also sits as the co-chair of a group called the Regional Planning Commissioners of Ontario, which is made up of chief planners from across the province. And they have also been advocating on behalf of municipalities for policy and regulatory changes that really do help to increase housing supply and affordability. And as you'll hear, a number of those municipalities share the same concerns as the City of Hamilton. After the presentation, we do have a number of staff who are here to take questions, including Director Robichaud and his planning staff. We also have staff here from the building division, from legal and finance, if there's any questions about those matters as well. So with that, I will introduce to you and turn things over to Planner Tiffany Singh for a brief presentation.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Tiffany.
Good morning. Just gonna share PowerPoint. Can everyone see that?
I think so. Yeah, I can.
Okay, great. Okay, so as expected, the province has moved rather quickly and last week announced their More Homes for Everyone plan and Bill 109, the More Homes for Everyone Act. The second reading was initially deferred, and the ERO consultation posting is technically open until April 29th, but the bill did receive second reading on Monday and has been referred to a single day at standing committee for April 11th. So, what does this bill propose? So surprisingly, it does not contain as many ambitious changes as kind of what was recommended in the Housing Affordability Task Force report. But if passed, this bill would make changes to the Planning Act, the City of Toronto Act, the Development Charges Act, the New Home Construction Licensing Act, and the Ontario New Homes Warranty Plan Act. And it would be the Planning Act that would see the most considerable change. So now I'm going to go through, or I'm going to try my best to highlight the changes and discuss their impacts and staff's recommendations. So there are several changes that will upload local decision-making powers to the Minister and Ontario Land Tribunal. The Minister would now be authorized to refer any official plan amendment to a plan or municipal conformity review to the OLT. Where a decision to the OP matters have been referred to the OLT, there would be no appeal rights to that decision. The minister would be permitted to pause the current 120-day legislated decision timeline to an official plan. There are also legislative changes that would increase the minister's jurisdiction with regards to prohibiting certain matters from municipal conditions of draft plan approval. What's interesting, though, is that we don't actually know what that potential list of prohibited conditions may be, requiring more detailed reporting to monitor local development applications and approvals, and then exercising jurisdiction on the type of securities and standards that a developer can use, but there's no indication of kind of what those risk standards would be that they would be applying. And then lastly, they have introduced a new process that is very similar to the the MZOs, Ministerial Zoning Orders, called a Community Infrastructure and Housing Accelerator. The difference would be that council would have to council would be required to pass a motion first and then host a public meeting to discuss the use of the tool before submitting the request to the minister. So now I'm going to go through kind of key changes that would impact the development application process. So requiring municipalities to refund application fees if a decision is not made within legislated timeframes. This kind of orange table shows the tiered refund approach for different types of development applications that were prescribed in the legislative amendments. And then requiring all municipalities to delegate site plan approval to staff and an extension of site plan review from 30 days to 60 days, while also applying complete application rules for site plan control applications. And then lastly, there was an administrative change to extend draft plan approvals for plans that have lapsed in the last 5 years where purchase and sale agreements apply. Now we'll go through kind of key changes that impact growth-related funding tools. So growth-related funding tools are development charges, community benefits charge, and parkland dedication. So they're implementing a tiered alternative parkland dedication rate for transit-oriented communities. The concern that staff have here is that we need clarity on what constitutes a TOC geographically. Is it the same as a protected major transit station area as in the growth plan? The province will also be able to declare that encumbered land, so that's land that may have easements on it or servicing running underneath below grade, that it could be contributing to parkland dedication requirements of a developer. And then increasing various reporting on growth-related funding tools and posting them online for transparency purposes, and then requiring a continual 5-year review on community benefit charge bylaws. So next we have some key changes that are part of the plan that was announced last Wednesday, but they aren't part of Bill 109 because Bill 109 is dealing with legislative changes. So instead, these changes would be to the Ontario Building Code, and the changes do align with the recommendations that came out of the Housing Affordability Task Force report. These changes would reflect modern building practices and address challenges to slow the delivery of housing projects. So that includes allowing up to 12-story mass timber buildings, streamlining modular multi-unit residential building approvals across the province, and enabling more low-rise and infill multi-residential opportunities by exploring kind of a one entrance or exit for 4 to 6 story residential buildings, and then exploring options to allow residential and commercial occupancy for super tall buildings that are still under construction. So it's unclear kind of what consultation work has been done with regards to these OBC changes. So we have summarized them at the end of Appendix A to the report, and we do include in that summary some comments that we received from fire servicing staff regarding safety considerations and protocols that they would like to see employed to avoid safety risks. And that's all again at the end of Appendix A. And then lastly, we've got some key programs and funding that's offered in the plan. So the first is a 19 million funding increase to the OLT to address backlogs and streamline appeals, creating a housing supply group to ensure municipalities actively support these provincial initiatives, collect data, and monitor progress, and support the improvements to the province's annual housing supply action plans. And then lastly, creating a Center for Realty Excellence. So this is really just arm's length group that would assess the province's 10,000 acres of underutilized real estate for potential projects such as long-term care facilities or community housing. Oh, and I forgot the increase to the non-residential speculation tax from 15 to 20% that was implemented last week. So this is really just a high-level overview of the changes. And as you can see, there are some really positive, good components of the plan that staff do support, but there are components that we have concerns with due to some of the potential consequences. So last night when I was whipping this PowerPoint together, my kids were watching the show, Nella the Princess Knight, behind me, and Gork the Orc, he gets to be king for the day, and the real king gives him this piece of solid advice, saying something along the lines of, with the power that you have to make decisions, that you need to carefully think about all the potential outcomes. So don't worry, I haven't quoted that in the report, but similar to that kind of childish analogy, staff do feel that these changes are narrowly focused. Some are clearly strategic decisions, and others feel like the province hasn't maybe thought them through completely. And some of these changes could have impacts that are actually to the opposite effect of their goals of being cost effective, reducing delays, and getting housing supply built. So next I have kind of a summary of some of those consequences. Increased provincial jurisdiction on local planning and decision making, penalizing municipalities for delaying that may not be due to the municipalities themselves, changes that would decrease the opportunity for public engagement and consensus building, uploading decision making to the OLT, which will result in less accountability for local community building and growth management, efforts to reduce upfront costs, will instead be shifted to cost for more litigation, really, at the tribunal process, which will be costlier for everyone really involved. And then changes that limit the opportunity for staff to work collaboratively on applications with the development industry. And then changes are really pivoting from a growth paying for growth model to existing ratepayers through increased taxes and servicing fees. And then lastly, an increase in staff resources would be needed across the organization to meet these legislated timeframes and to avoid appeals. So similar to kind of some of the gaps that we outlined in the review of the Housing Task Force recommendations, staff have identified that there are missed opportunities here too. So Bill 109 misses the opportunity to include mechanisms to ensure that proposed developments actually get built. Considering the name of this bill, More Homes for Everyone, and even the task force name, Housing Affordability Task Force, there is an evidence absence of any real tools to address deeply affordable housing. So we're talking about the 60th percentile and below, or to address other aspects of affordability like living wage considerations. Decisions about how to increase supply must be sustainable in terms of how to service the housing supply, the cost to deliver and maintain those services, environmental performance, as well as providing necessary social infrastructure and other forms of infrastructure that are required to build complete communities. And then lastly, recognition that the housing supply issue and development approval processes do vary across the province and involve other agencies and approval authorities that may contribute to the processing delays that are outside of the city's control. So some of the proposed changes in Bill 109 seem to be an unnecessary overreach with punitive costs to municipalities. Some of the proposed amendments may lead to more adversarial relationships between the community and the development industry due to a lack of the consensus building opportunity that the current planning process plays. So the city encourages the province to reconsider amendments that would result in increased OLT litigation and to instead add mechanisms that ensure proposed developments get built and in a reasonable time, to consider more tools and funding opportunities to increase supply of deeply affordable housing. So, as Jason mentioned, staff want to reiterate or highlight what the city has been doing and has achieved that already aligns with the intent of this plan and bill. So the city conforms to the provincial targets and efforts to increase housing supply. We've made internal efforts to streamline planning approval processes. We have an effective preliminary application process to better equip applicants with making complete applications and for a more efficient process once they've submitted those applications. We already have delegated site plan authority to staff. Last year, surety bonds were implemented as a financing option. The planning department has also made several proactive updates to achieve the existing intensification sorry, my throat, targets. And that includes pre-zoning the light rail transit corridor, adopting new commercial and mixed use zoning, updating our downtown secondary plan and pre-zoning the downtown area, introducing citywide zoning to allow for secondary units and detached units like laneway housing. And then currently we're bringing forward zoning bylaw changes that would allow for up to 4 units on a lot. So that brings us to kind of next steps and really the purpose of this special meeting. So we anticipate that this bill will move swiftly and hope to get these comments to the minister for consideration before standing committee on Monday. Our recommendations include that council receive this report and attachments on a basis for written comments towards Bill 109, that the mayor submit a letter to the minister outlining these comments. And then lastly, if this bill is passed, a bulk of the proposed changes won't actually take effect until January of 2023. So we do have some time to prepare, but there are legislative changes to site plan control in particular that are tentatively scheduled to take effect as early as July 1st. So we ask for the authority to go back, for staff to go back, make necessary amendments to our OPs and procedural changes to give effect to these amendments, as well as provide detailed assessments on staffing and financial implications, and then report back to the June, I guess it would be the June 14th Planning Committee meeting. So that's it. That's a high-level overview of staff's perspectives on this plan and bill.
And very well presented, Tiffany. Thank you very much. And clear and concise, and certainly represents some serious concerns around the direction that the province is taking. So we do have a list of questions, I think, on the presentation first off. So Councillors Clark, Farr, and Danko are on deck here. Councillor Clark, you're up first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So when I'm reading the act, it appears to me that the tribunal can now make a decision on applications that are referred to them without holding a hearing.
That's a question.
Yes.
Tiffany or Steve or Jason or who, you know, I'll let you direct the question. Do you want to answer that, Tiffany?
I believe that they have included appeal rights, but the way that it's written is that anything that is referred to the OLT is really exempt from being appealed. So it's really crafty in how that was written.
Yes, I agree with you there. Absolutely. And I'm looking right now. I found the actual section. So section 58 of the bill, a hearing or other proceedings by the tribunal before making a recommendation, which is to the minister, the tribunal may hold a hearing. It doesn't say shall hold a hearing, which is a little bit disturbing. Can I get comment, Mr. Mayor, on, I found another section, which I found a little bit confusing, but it sounds as though if we don't make a decision on time, referring to the municipality, that 50% of the application fee can be refunded back to the applicant, or maybe it's the actual development charge. I don't know. I'm trying to understand it.
Yep. Thank you, Tiffany.
So there is a tiered kind of approach to refunding. So for instance, maybe it'd be helpful if I actually pull up that slide.
Yeah, why don't you put that orange slide up?
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, but it was very confusing to me.
Yep. Yep.
Is that large enough to see there?
I think we can independently amplify, can we not? I think. Anyway, continue on. Yep.
Okay, so as you can see, there would be no refund if the municipality makes a decision within 90 days on a zoning bylaw amendment application. But then if that decision is made within the 91 to 149-day time frame, we would be required to refund the applicant 50% of their application fee. And then it progressively gets worse until a 100% refund. So as mentioned in the presentation, sometimes there are delays that are really outside of the city's jurisdiction and control. And I feel like there hasn't really been thought put towards the potential implications of this. Staff may rush to make a preemptive kind of decision in order to avoid having to refund fees, which is really not useful for anybody. And then it really just pushes everything to the litigation stage so much faster. We think, and our experience has been in the Hamilton area, that developers really just want to see that their applications are moving. They want to know that someone's working on it. They want to have a collaborative approach. They want updates. That's, a communication process that takes place. So we're kind kind of shocked actually to see this piece be added in here, because it wasn't really in the Housing Task Force recommendations report. They actually had a recommendation to just give approval if we didn't meet legislative time frames. So this refunding process is a bit odd. It also kind of goes against what was implemented in Bill 108 for the Heritage Act changes, which allows like a pause and a communication strategy to really work things out as long as all parties agree. So I think that this is just, I don't know. We all agree, staff.
I agree with Mr. Mayor. I agree with Tiffany completely. Most developers in Hamilton, my experience has been that they work with our planning staff, and it is a collaborative approach, and it goes through the process. However, there are some developers who do not respond to our staff or do not file the reports that are necessary for staff to make a decision, and that's not staff's fault or the council's fault. It's that at the other end of the scale, they're withholding information that we need to make a decision. And this proposed amendment does not consider that at all. It just assumes that the city's is responding slowly. Can I also ask a question? How does it work with plans that are now under consideration? So would Bill 109 apply to plans that applications are now in the hopper and we're working through the process? Or would those plans fall outside of Bill 109, and then any new application after Bill 109 is approved would be following this new process?
This is, thank you. This is a good question. I'm hoping actually, do we have legal staff that could respond
We have
to this?
all appropriate staff here, so it's
yeah, I read the act, Mr. Mayor, and I couldn't find anything. Maybe I missed it, but
who's here from legal that might address that question? Maybe you could take the slide down right now, Tiffany. I think we've got the punitive slide engraved in our minds now. Ron Szabó. Ron?
Ron Szabó, Acting City Solicitor. Pardon me, could I ask for the question to be repeated?
Yep.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. So when I was reviewing the act, it dawned on me that we have many applications that are currently in the hopper, planning applications. And I'm trying to figure out, will Bill 109 apply for them in terms of the deadlines that are being prescribed, or will Bill 109 only apply to applications that are new after Bill 109 receives royal assent?
Thanks. And I'll call time for you and get that answer. And if you need to go on a second time for more questions, happy to do that.
No, thank you for the latitude, sir. I'll do that. Thank you.
Yep.
And through the mayor, I'll have to look further through the act to identify that. I did see some transitory language, but at this point I was uncertain if it was a planning application, a site plan application, or another application it was referring to, and I'll need time to look that up.
Thank you.
I see Anita popped up. Is Anita interested?
Anita?
Good morning. Anita Fayback, Manager of Development Planning. Through the councillor, through the chair to the councillor, there is a change that has been made to the act, and the language says that it's with respect to an application received on or after the day that the More Homes for Everyone Act comes into force. So my interpretation of that is that would come into effect January 1st, 2023. So any application that's received on January 1st or after would be subject to these refund requirements. Any applications received prior to would not be subject to it.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, if the clerk could put me on for a second time, that would be great. Thank you, sir.
Be sure to do that. Thank you. Councillor Farr. And maybe, some of the questions that other members of council might ask would address any other concerns you have, but we'll see. Councillor Farr.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's pretty clear that this is a conservative election stratagem, and the way Tiffany presented it here it may very well backfire, but we'll see. Tiffany, really great presentation. Clearly took you away from your full attention of a children's program on television last night, but you really put it together well and you summed it up well for us. I mean, we're especially up against the clock here, and you really appreciate it. If you could go to the slide on the well, we're not calling it MZOs anymore. I think it's the new process called the Community Infrastructure and Housing Accelerator in this Bill 109 plan. And then you had mentioned requiring a council motion and a public meeting. And I just thought maybe, given that this might be the most controversial aspect of all, this deserves just a little more explanation. So can you expand on this particular bullet, Tiffany, for us?
So it really is, so far, it sounds very similar to an MZO. The difference is that there is some upfront work that would be required by council, which would be having a meeting and requiring a motion, and then a public meeting, a public forum to kind of explain where and why they want to utilize this tool, and then giving that to the minister for them to make a decision on using it or not.
It's no details on how the public meeting works. Does that mean a meeting of the standing
No.
committee? Does it mean go rent a gym?
Yeah, there aren't detailed guidelines on that aspect.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, one of these concerning elements of this would be really to facilitate a school, a park, you know, a piece of infrastructure that's necessary and essential for city building. But the regulation is very specific. Yes, council will have to pass a resolution to ask for this tool to be used, and council will have to consult with the community. But in the regulation or the proposed planning act changes will also say is in looking to have this tool adopted, the minister and the municipality are not bound by any provincial policy. So it doesn't have to comply with the provincial policy statement, doesn't have to comply with the green belt or the growth plan, and it doesn't have to comply with the city's official plan. So essentially it would be a way to circumvent the normal planning process, or what we've done in Hamilton's case is through the public use provisions in our zoning bylaw, council is given some degree of flexibility in terms of what a use is, but the use would also then extend to a third party. So if a school or a university wanted to build something, they could petition council to use this clause to circumvent the planning process to establish a use. I think the concern is that by the tool not being bound by the city's official plan, it would effectively be setting up conflict with council in the sense that the community looks as the official plan is the city's land use vision, but council would be you would be under pressure to pass a resolution after and hold an information meeting to do something that's contrary to the official plan, as opposed to the process that we follow is either to have an up-to-date and flexible official plan and zoning regulations or direct staff to proceed through a planning process to allow this infrastructure to happen. So I think that's part of our concern. It's still effectively an MZO, but it's just an MZO that requires council to pass a resolution and have a public meeting. It doesn't really do anything else at the end of the day from what you would normally achieve through an MZO. So thank you. Sorry, Steve Robichaud, Director of Planning and Chief Planner.
Thank you, Steve.
Through the chair, I just wanted to add that it also can't be applied to Greenbelt area. So there is an amendment that specifies where it can be used and can't be used, and it would be outside of the Greenbelt.
Thank you. Councilor Farr.
So we're all clear. The current MZO process the council can be completely circumvented. Is that not correct? Can a planning firm not go directly to the province and have their wishes addressed there through you to Tiff?
Through the chair. Oh, I see Steve has popped up.
No, that is correct through you, Mr. Chair, that anybody can petition the minister at any point in time to issue an MZO, including the City of Hamilton. The council has passed one resolution seeking an MZO. That was to advance an affordable housing project. So either a individual landowner can petition the minister to enact an MZO, or a municipality or another agency could petition the minister to initiate an MZO. It's been very rarely used in the City of Hamilton. I can only think of 2 or 3 examples where there's been an MZO, 3 four examples where there's been an MZO enacted in Hamilton. There was the affordable housing project on King Street. There's the former Hamilton Psychiatric Hospital lands. There was the former St. Mary's Quarry, and the other one was around the casino, the Flamborough Casino, where the minister enacted an MZO in Hamilton's case, as opposed to what we're seeing happening in other parts of the GTA. Thank you.
And so that could still happen here with Bill 109, just so I'm clear.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, the
bypassing
minister
council.
still retains the authority to for an MZO. So this legislative change is not really required because effectively at the end of the day, it is an MZO. All that they are doing is rebranding it and just laying out what that process would be for enacting an MZO. But I think what's unique here is whereas under an MZO, the provincial staff have said they are not bound by official plan policy. In this case, they're just making it very explicit that should a local council wish to pass a resolution under this community tool, the local council could do it and not have to be bound by their official plan in passing that resolution requesting the province to enact this tool. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you, Director Robichaud.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Reading this, Bill 109, the More Homes for Everyone Act, should really be renamed the More Money from Campaign Donors Act, because it seems like it's written for and by the development industry. The province is downloading the cost of development to municipal taxpayers. They're creating a regulatory process that is by design impossible for us to meet. They're placing the approval process into, basically a provincial rubber stamp through the Ontario Land Tribunal with appointed representatives by the province, excluding local expertise and our city residents. And, the idea that was staff raised through the presentation that the province hasn't thought things through, essentially is the hallmark of the Ford government. And unfortunately, it's taxpayers in Hamilton, especially young families, in desperate need of real affordable housing that are left paying the price. So through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to focus in on a couple of things that we have done as the City of Hamilton already through our planning processes and our planning staff. As past chair of the Planning Committee, I coming in as an engineer and working in a technical field, I've been extremely impressed by our professional planning staff. Coming in not knowing a thing about planning, our staff is really second to none, and the job that they do is absolutely phenomenal. The workload that they have, and all the changes that came in through this provincial government have just been, such a challenge this term. So through you, I'd like to ask, it was touched on in the presentation by Ms. Singh about some of the things that we have already done to streamline the planning process, to assist with approvals. We've done the delegated authority for the site plans, but I want to focus down more on what we've already done to address housing affordability in Hamilton, specifically the secondary suites legislation policy that we've passed, working towards family-friendly housing policy, the affordable housing projects that we as a city have facilitated, thinking about 60 Caledon, Roxborough Park, and others, the vacant homes tax, short-term rentals policy. So through you, can I just ask for staff to maybe elaborate on some of that good work that we have done as a city to make homes more affordable?
So maybe Tiffany can put the slide back up again in terms of measures we've taken, and you're right to point out that for the last 10 years, we've been streamlining process and improving process, quite actively. So here are some of the things that we have done. So Tiffany, do you want to kind of walk us through one more time?
Sure. So through the chair, staff have been proactive in addressing the housing supply continuum. So that means looking at opportunities to provide housing that's market rate and that is trying to establish more tools for deeply affordable housing as well. Councillor Danko has already mentioned a bunch of the more recent projects with the SEPA that was done for the Roxborough project that really was written in a way that it could also be applied to other areas of the city. The vacant tax or vacant homes tax, the work that's currently being done on the family friendly housing project. And staff are currently looking into the inclusionary zoning policies and doing some background research on what other municipalities have been working on really and putting forward a kind of terms of reference plan for that project to start. So that's some of the more recent stuff that's going on currently, but this slide outlines what's already come down the pipe and I feel like the overreach that we're hearing from the province is really targeting a few players and really kind of painting all municipalities with the same brush. And I think that the city of Hamilton has a great working relationship with both the community and the development industry on consensus building and kind of moving applications through to the best of our abilities. And as mentioned before, there are sometimes holdups that are really outside of the city's jurisdiction. It's another approval authority or component to the process that we're waiting for that's holding up the decision. And even the ability to expand lapsed subdivisions, that's really not an issue that we've had here in Hamilton yet. So just to show, we are moving through applications quite quickly, efficiently. And really the issue that we're seeing here, at least, is that some of these developments don't actually get built. And what mechanism is there for us to ensure that they do get built and to sunset approvals potentially to ensure that we're appropriately planning and allocating for growth?
Yep. Thank you. Councillor
Thank you.
Danko, that's time for you. And
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a couple specific questions on the report. So if when we get to that, put me back on. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just ask members of council just to focus on questions for the moment. I think we are going to be obviously looking at the recommendation item 4.1. And I'm anxious to get my points across as well. But let's focus on questions, and then we can get to some debate and everyone make their points on the politics of all of this. So, Councillor Ferguson, you're up next.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I had the opportunity to be at a Roma board meeting this morning, starting at 9 o'clock, and we spent about an hour on this issue. And it's interesting. The president of AMO, or the executive director of AMO, which is also the same for Roma, says that when he goes before the province, and he's been twice, and he's going back again Monday to the standing committee on, the government is absolutely convinced that municipalities are the bottleneck in the planning process. And a big part of his presentation on Monday will be why we're not. And I didn't see us addressing that in what we respond. So are we dealing with that at all in our response, that we're not necessarily the bottleneck? And of course, the best example is when developers or their consultants are asked for clarification on technical issues. I've had experience in Ward 12 where they take 6 months and they still don't have it in. The developer gets angry, and you show them the letter that they were sent, and because their consultants are busy also. So are we addressing that at all, that we're not the bottleneck in the planning process?
Thank you. Tiffany?
Through the chair, we kind of addressed it in regards to kind of the upfront process that would need to be a little bit more robust. So currently, we have terms of reference for kind of a complete application. We have a formal consultation, our preliminary application process as well, that helps to kind of guide an applicant in all the documents and material that would be required as part of a complete application. And we try to facilitate them understanding all those details up front so that we can hopefully have a more swiftly moving application once it actually is submitted that contains all those details and reduces the need to go back and forth with iterative changes. But that does happen, and sometimes we understand their pressures and we're kind of willing to work with them as we've taken in the application and we're working with them, even though there are some visible not flaws, but gaps in information that they may have provided. And we would just have a much more robust and strict policy as a result of these changes to ensure that there are no gaps, no missing information, that all the details rubber stamped, all of that is completed perfectly before we would deem an application complete.
Thank you.
So that's to say the 120 days doesn't start to count until after the application is deemed
It's
complete.
been deemed correct.
Okay, and of course the big rush for this is what we were told this morning, is that the writ comes down on May the 2nd, and they want third reading and royal assent before May the 2nd. That's what the big push is, and because they are being lobbied by the development industry who donate to their campaigns, that the municipalities are holding them up, and that they feel it's critical to get this done. Sounds like they're going to make it. But on the 120 days, you said this morning or earlier in your presentation that the minister can pause the 120 days. But is it only for him, or is it, can municipalities also pause it if there's issues?
Thank you.
Through the chair, it's only the minister that can do that.
Okay, because we're finding the 120 days very tough, and you know, it'll force us to maybe have more recommendation for denials in order to avoid having to give 50% of the fees back in order to have be safe with the application. So I think you're right. It may hurt the process or slow the process down more than it's going to help. But I appreciate your presentation this morning, and I'm fully supportive of the resolution. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Tiffany, I appreciate the presentation very much. It's very thorough. And I also appreciate the questions from my colleagues. I just have one question. You know, up here, particularly in Waterdown, there are a number of applications that are currently at the OLT. And they, you know, some have hearing dates scheduled actually for the next couple of weeks, and some do not. So my question is, and perhaps I missed this, how will all these changes, if Bill 109 is enacted, will it apply to the current OLT applications? What will be the impact there on those hearings?
Thank you. Tiffany.
Through the chair, I'm hoping that maybe Steve or Anita could chime in here.
Yeah, let's go with Anita.
Through the chair to the councillor, the changes that are proposed don't directly impact any OLT hearings that are currently scheduled or underway. The only thing that I might add where there may be a change is that the province is providing more funding to the OLT to what we assume is to hire more members. So that may facilitate some of the hearings perhaps being scheduled sooner or proceeding a little quicker. But I don't anticipate that other than those sort of funding changes that there would be any impacts to existing OLT hearings.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Anita, that response is somewhat reassuring. As you know, the one very big application that has just gone to the OLT is a massive residential development at Clapison Corner. So I'll be interested to see how this is going through. But I appreciate and agree with some of the comments that have been made previous. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And you know, while you're there, Anita, the OLT is made up of appointed members by the province.
That's correct. Yes.
And so far, we've seen the OLT actually give most developers everything they're asking for that we may have denied. So they're having some great success at the OLT. Is that accurate?
Through the mayor, yes, that is accurate. We're finding that they generally are in support of applications that are looking at increasing the number of units that are provided or being proposed. There was one instance where I would say there was an appeal of, and I believe this was in Councillor Partridge's ward, where there was an appeal to for non-decision, and staff were not in support of it. In this instance, the applicant wanted to actually down zone or down designate the subject lands. They were allowed an apartment and they wanted to put in some townhouses. So in that case, staff felt that, and strongly in not supporting the applicant's proposal and to sort of maintain that designation in the secondary plan, and we were successful there. But there are other situations and other circumstances where we have not been successful in terms of looking at a reduction in height or a reduction in density in units.
Great, thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Mr. Mayor, good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Planner Singh, for your presentation. Nice to meet you virtually. Just a comment first, Mr. Mayor, then I want to get to resources within the planning department, ask a question primarily to General Manager Thorne, but I can only surmise, Mr. Mayor, everybody's taking some shots at the current provincial government and the OLT that's set up to be favorable to developers. I can only imagine and surmise that this provincial government's done their internal polling, and they wouldn't be going in this direction if they didn't think that there was acceptable grounds for it. But of course, the next 2 months will determine that before June 2nd. I'd like to get to the point about resources within planning, because Mr. Mayor, whether it's small, mid-size, or large developers and business and investors, I'm long preamble here, but forgive me. I've heard the common complaint, and I'm so respectful of Chief Planner Robichaud and his fantastic team of planners. I always have been, and have said that publicly and privately many times. However, 3 years ago, I think we added about 6 planners because the department desperately needed them. And whether it's a small, mid-sized, large developer, I do hear constant complaints about the length of time for their planning application to even be processed to a point where they can even respond in the first instance, even long before the final report comes to planning committee. So I'd like to ask through you to General Manager Thorne. I think in the building department, Jason, doesn't the building department have the ability that on standby they can hire more staff when needed? I don't think our planning department, to my knowledge, has that ability. Can you comment and provide some further feedback through you, Mr. Mayor, please?
Thank you. Jason?
Yes. Through the chair, yes, I can. And I apologize, I'm having a little bit of bandwidth issue, so I'm going to answer with my camera off, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So to Councillor Jackson's question, yes, there is a model in the building division that I would suggest, with the kinds of changes being contemplated here within the planning process, we would need something similar more broadly across staff who are involved in the approvals process. The building division does have the ability to create full-time FTE positions in year outside of with delegated authority to the director, as long as those positions have no levy impact. So those are positions funded off of building permit fees. Many of our staff, not all staff, but many of the staff involved in the planning review process are either fully or mostly funded through fees. Without levy contribution. So given the fact to meet these kinds of timelines, I would say we are certainly not resourced currently to meet these timelines, and that's noted in the report. I would say that goes far beyond just planning. Keep in mind that any development application, yes, there are planners involved, but also there are engineers involved in the review in the growth management division. There are building staff involved. There are zoning staff involved. There are public works staff involved. Transportation planning, legal agreements. There are many sort of tentacles that development applications have into many different areas of the corporation, not just planning and not just PED. And so I would suggest, what we are resourced to do when we last did our fee bylaw update, when we come to council, when we do seek enhancements, we are resourced to a certain service level in terms of the timelines that we can meet, and we are very transparent in communicating those timelines every year to the public and making that data available on our open data website in terms of what timelines we are meeting. I think that was actually acknowledged as as a best practice by the province. To meet these enhanced staff levels and with the potential financial implication of not meeting them, I would suggest that we would need enhanced resources across many aspects of the corporation, and we would also need the latitude, the nimbleness to resource up and down as needed. We would probably not have the luxury of just evaluating the situation and coming to the council at budget time once per year.
I appreciate that thorough, very comprehensive explanation, General Manager. But when I'm dealing with commercial development and or residential development, everyone, of course, focuses in on Councillor Jackson. The planning department's had my application for over a year and just can't seem to get any movement. So I appreciate you said it's beyond planning, but I think the perception is that planning department quarterbacks this file. So, General Manager, what you just described, that's all embedded in this report today, so I don't lose sight of it, and it's going to be for further discussion down the road. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
So through the chair, certainly the resource implications are noted. How exactly we would respond, I think, would come back at a future report if these legislative changes proceed. I would just also note one other thing that is noted in the report and was certainly part of my budget presentation a couple of months back is it's not just a matter of creating the authority to hire the positions. The market right now, it is very difficult to find experienced planners, engineers, plans examiners across a whole host of professional disciplines. So we have noted as well to the province that is another potential barrier. And quite frankly, that's not just on our side of the counter. I would think applicants themselves, if they're going to respond to staff requests and staff comments on studies and so on, they also will need to resource up. And I know that across the development sector right now, public sector and private sector, finding those professional staff is extremely difficult right now.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I'll wrap up on that point. Just a closing comment. I'm trying to head off more and more applications going immediately to the OLT, where I saw recently in planning committee agendas, we're losing a whole pile of them. The majority of them were being overturned and we're losing them at OLT. I'm trying to head that off. If we can work with applicants who say, Tom, if you could just help me to expedite my application and meet with staff a lot sooner, get it to the planning committee, it would save me from deciding to go the provincial route. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll have some thoughts on that later as well. But Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm going to try and limit to questions, sir. First off, I want to thank Tiffany for an excellent presentation and putting it all together so quickly. So I guess my questions are going to be, and I'm just probably reiterating, but by the sounds of all of this, if we don't meet timelines moving forward with the 60, 90, 120 day, whatever, we lose fees exponentially that we've already spent as far as services provided by our staff in the studies and the reports preparation, et cetera. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Tiffany?
Through the chair, you are correct. So we would need to find that money from somewhere, and it would be coming from the levy.
Correct, thank you. And the city, so you mentioned another section, and I'm sorry, the pages weren't numbered on the presentation, so I'm flipping back and forth. The city would be in a situation that we could potentially have to hold meetings on something we don't even support or haven't even made, staff haven't even made a recommendation on. Is that correct, Tiffany?
Through the chair, maybe you're referring to the
province requiring us. I remember you mentioning it, and I'm trying to find where it was.
Yeah, the MZO process, I think.
Yeah.
So with regards to that, they're calling it a CHIA, even though the acronym doesn't really spell CHIA. But anyways, with that tool, it would be if council wanted to utilize that tool, we would be required to pass a motion and to have a public meeting before making a formal request to the minister.
And that would be on the city's dime and not the developers?
This would be a tool that the city could utilize.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm just thinking now, there are a couple of comments. You made a comment about the provinces initiating that where we have any infrastructure, underground infrastructure. So I'm picturing the TOC route all along King Street, right? With all of our infrastructures under that road, that there'll be reductions in parkland dedication in order to accommodate the issue of underground services. Is that correct?
Through the chair, you're correct. So they would count, the province would count encumbered lands. So that's lands that have easements on it or servicing infrastructure that runs underneath below grade infrastructure. That would count towards parkland dedication for a developer. So they could convey that portion to the city as part of their parkland dedication.
But it's not even their lands. Unless, are you speaking of underground that are on their lands? Like, I don't know what would be on somebody's private land. A pipeline, a gas line, or because any infrastructure in the TOC wouldn't be on their lands, it'd be on the roadway.
Mr. Mayor, if I can assist, the model that the province is contemplating would be to say to allow for a subway to go underneath a municipal park, and under that scenario, the municipality would have to accept that parkland dedication, even though there would be an encumbrance of a subway. So, in Hamilton, I think there'd be less. It wouldn't necessarily be infrastructure within a road allowance. It would be more infrastructure that would go underneath a park that would then limit the city's ability in terms of how we use that park. So in our case, it would be more if there was, it would relate to LRT infrastructure. So if there was a need to build a tunnel underneath a park to get from one side of the road to across through a park to get to a subway, that couldn't, under that situation. I think if you see what's happening, say in York region where they're doing these, or even the Toronto railway lands, those sorts of scales and intensity of development where they're building over either a GO lines or over other roadways, the municipality then would essentially have a stratified severance where the park would be the top piece and below the park would be transportation related infrastructure such as roads or railways or subways. For the Parks Department, it may have cost implications because it limits how you manage or provides additional costs from a stormwater management perspective, or it removes some flexibility in the design and the operation of that park. So that's the one issue. And then the second issue too is through the proposed regulations, though, the province is also looking at a lower standard for parkland dedication around transit-oriented development. So instead of the city's normal parkland dedication bylaw, the minister could impose a lower standard, which would then, for an existing neighborhood, say, that we have a parkland deficiency already, then that new population growth would just further aggravate that parkland deficiency rather than maintaining it at a neutral state, in the sense that new development should pay for growth, and that includes the adequate provision of parkland. Or alternatively, it should be a local municipal decision if we want to lower the parkland standard for intensification and reurbanization projects. But we do know that many of the neighborhoods in the lower city, for example, because of the historical development pattern, they are already dealing with a parkland deficiency. And one of the changes is just to further make that parkland deficiency worse by lowering the parkland dedication standard around transit-oriented development, which is to be defined by the province through separate legislation and regulation as to what those TOCs would look like. So it can just set up a bit of tension between the municipal decision makers and how how the province will treat this development going forward. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. I'm glad I asked the question. So it certainly opened up the thought process of what's involved here. My last question, just a couple comments after Mr. Mayor, if I can.
Well, no, you're at time, so I'm going to ask you to do the question, and then I'll come back to you.
Okay, I'll ask the question, and the question is just with regards to, there's a comment of something financing that the province is looking at. We've looked at surety bonds. The province is allowing other forms of securities. Has finance, anyone been involved in that?
I'm aware. Tiffany?
Through the mayor. So finance was circulated on the table, the Appendix A material, and have provided comments there. So the surety bonds have already been implemented as an option for financing last year. That was done, I think, in October. The difference, or the question that we have and need some more clarity on, is would the city's terms of reference and kind of formatting information, would that comply with what the minister is suggesting, like the letter of credit, like all of the material that's required. They haven't indicated kind of what their level of risk that they want municipalities to take on, what that looks like. So all those details are missing, and so clarity is needed to understand if we would have to update our documents regarding surety bonds and using them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll hold my comments till later.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Thank you. Councillor Wilson and myself, if you could put me on as a first-time questioner. Councillor Wilson, questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is difficult to just stick to questions when something is just so obviously egregious and political, but I'll do my best. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the excellence of Ms. Singh again today in taking something like this and putting it in a format that we can understand and doing it so quickly. So thank you. I just would like to go back to the premise, starting with the title of the act, which is More Homes for Everyone. For everyone. And if I could ask through the mayor to Ms. Singh, the recommendations of the task force, some of which were lauded by different points along the political spectrum, because there was the impression, even though the focus was on the market system, and even though they were pushing the idea of supply being able to solve the singularly the affordability issue, if you could identify the recommendations generally or some specifically to your knowledge that this government did not incorporate into Bill 109 that came from the task force.
Thank you. Through the mayor. So the Housing Affordability Task Force report actually was very limited in tools and ideas that they provided that would really address truly affordable housing or deeply affordable housing issues. There were some recommendations that were kind of hidden within Appendix B, and it all related to kind of inclusionary zoning. And I think it really stems from actually the Toronto experience, because Toronto was the first to really move on inclusionary zoning in the province. And what the development industry, including nonprofit housing organizations, have said is that there needs to be an incentive to really make the inclusionary zoning work. And that's for the Toronto market in particular. But it is assumed that that is something that other municipalities will have to consider, like what incentives can they provide to help make more deeply affordable housing within those inclusionary units. So that commentary was buried. It wasn't one of the, numbered recommendations within the task force report. It was in Appendix B. And then there is an absence of any of that within this plan. I think the only piece that really speaks to truly looking at community housing and affordable housing is this real estate arm that they'd like to create that would CORE, I think is the acronym, that would look at all the surplus lands that the ministry, that the province owns, and looking at highest and best use, but using them for community purposes. So whether that be long-term care facilities or community housing. So that's really the only piece that really speaks to affordable housing that targets kind of that 60th percentile and below. Everything else that they have done, or that they would like to implement, really is just targeting market rate housing. And we do know that supply is part of the problem, the affordability crisis, but it is only part of the problem. And yes, I would agree that it seems like the assumption is that increasing market rate supply will somehow address the affordability issue.
It's interesting, Mr. Mayor, to that point. I was reading some documentation last night from Professor David Hulchansky, who is an acclaimed scholar on housing. And in his work, he was citing books from the war era and the post-war era, which was talking about the crisis of affordability. and the false narrative that has followed the provision of housing, in that it in fact has not been market provided. It has always been accompanied by very significant gifts of tax cuts and grants to put more supply onto the market under the guise of the market system. The other question I have through the mayor to you, Ms. Singh, is in the past, this municipality, as part of its urban Indigenous strategy, has spoken about the importance when it comes to matters of land use, partnerships on the land, of forming and engaging in consultation. And I believe so far as with the Joint Stewardship Board, if this municipality, for example, wanted to add lanes to the expressway, we would need to consult with First Nations persons and could not do that. So what would it mean, and I don't know if it's particular to this area, this part of Ontario, or perhaps others, what might the implications of this curtailed consultation and timeline mean for our efforts to right maybe some wrongs and engage in consultation with First Nations as part of that development process? Do you care to comment on that?
That's time for you as well, so we'll get an answer to that question, and you can go on a second time.
Through the
Can you
mayor,
answer that, Tiffany?
I will attempt to. I think it is a great question, a great consideration. Based on staff's review, we feel that these amendments would limit overall consultation opportunities. And by limiting the timeframes that we have to work with the community, the only option that we see to kind of deal with this change would be to have kind of a consultation component that's required upfront before an application is even made. So having that requirement up front could provide the opportunity to have more meaningful consultation with all parties, including Indigenous community members. I'm not sure if Steve wants to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The proposed legislative changes would create a situation where if an application was made, we identified the need for additional First Nations consultation. The applicant was in agreement to have that First Nations consultation, but recognizing that often that can take time in terms of have that and not to rush to move the process. After 120 days, if it was an official plan amendment, we would have to refund the money to the applicant, even if the applicant didn't ask for a fee refund, because they acknowledged they had an obligation or a responsibility to engage in that consultation. It creates that sort of perverse situation. We saw this at Planning Committee like on Tuesday, where the applicant said they were in no rush for a decision. They knew they needed at least another 90 or 120 days to respond to the staff comments. But the way the legislation is structured, unless the municipality was willing to absorb the costs and related to a development application, they would have to refund the fees by not making a decision either on 90 or 120 days. That's the fundamental flaw in this legislation. It doesn't define what a decision is. So, in speaking with legal, they could think about allowing to put a pause on the clock, or as Ms. Singh indicated, like under the Heritage Act, we could negotiate a pause and to allow for things to continue on in the process. The way the legislation has been written is council must make a decision within either 60, 90, or 60 days on a site plan, 90 days on a rezoning, or 120 days on an official plan amendment. Because if council doesn't make that decision, even if the decision would have been to put a pause on to go and have more consultation, we can't do that. We have to either approve or deny the application, because if we don't, we have to refund money to the applicant, and the applicant may not even, in the case that we saw on Tuesday, the applicant said, I think I want to have more consultation, but because of the dangers of an appeal, we said, no, a decision has to be made. It really removes that discretion from council to work with the applicant and the community, because there's a financial penalty by trying to work with the applicant and the community on a go-forward basis. And that's why we were suggesting that it would be better if they could just, look at the Heritage Act or other legislation around this matter. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chief Planner Robichaud. That was a perfect example, that file of the problem now and the problem that is going to be created in the future. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see Councillor Nan on the screen. So I'm going to ask Councillor Farr to take the chair for a moment. And
I'm here. Go ahead.
oh, you are there. Okay. Thank you. So just to kind of refresh, certainly public that's watching out there. I mean, our fees are based on cost recovery. So what it costs us to process applications is the fee that we charge to developers to do that, correct?
Through the deputy chair, the mayor, that is correct. We operate on the principle of 100% cost recovery to receive and process a development application. We do not make any money on it. There's no profit on it. It is purely an activity-based costing exercise based on all, as Mr. Thorne indicated, to recover all of the staff, overhead costs, and administrative costs to receive and process a development application for the city of Hamilton. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you. And to put it into context of the scenario that the province is now working through, it's actually in the developer's interest to rag the puck, so to speak, to get past a certain timeline that then requires us either to make a decision as to deny so that we don't lose the ability to recover fees, which then drives this to the Ontario Land Tribunal in a much more accelerated kind of way. That's a scenario that I think is plausible under the regime that the province is actually laying out.
Through you to the mayor, that is correct. Your scenario is what we sort of anticipate happening on a go-forward basis. Thank you.
Right, and then on top of that, I'll make this as a rhetorical question. And whatever fees we lose, we now have to go back to the tax base to recover, as well as, and we haven't touched on this significantly yet, the development charge issue. So to you, Tiffany, explain, how through this process, growth is not going to pay for growth. So we have been saying all along that growth has to pay for growth. Growth should pay for growth. We're not quite there yet relative to the Development Charges Act and the development charges that we charge. We're still, I think, short 10% or something thereabouts. But the standard of having growth pay for growth is completely diminished here as a result of the planning regime that they're putting forward.
I will respond to that, Mr. Mayor. You are correct. Based on the changes that were made to the Development Charges Act earlier by the current government, combined with these changes, there will be a transfer in the cost where the levy, the existing homeowners and property owners are being asked to pay an increasing share of growth-related costs. We saw that with the changes to the Development Charges Act. The community benefits charge and some of the issues around parkland dedication is going to transfer additional costs to the municipality, and this will be a further now transfer as it relates to development application fees from the levy to applicants. So growth will just be the proportion of costs that growth are paying for is decreasing with each subsequent legislative change that the province has been bringing forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And on top of all of that, the province is also suggesting that in most respects, less public consultation is going to happen through this process as opposed to more. So clearly their public consultation isn't particularly robust at the Ontario Land Tribunal, to be fair. Although they can participate, it seems to me that, of the cases that have gone to the Ontario Land Tribunal, we've lost most of them. And so they're a favorable engine for the province to use to circumvent local planning and local community consultation. I don't expect you to answer that question. That's a rhetorical question, built into a statement, built into a complaint, built into a really sad commentary on where this province is going with this particular legislation. So I'll have more to say on, not understanding the rationale around this, but clearly we need to make sure that, like many other municipalities in the province, including the Ontario Big City Mayors, that we make a lot of noise about what they're proposing to do here, and certainly make that part of our advocacy relative to the election that's coming out. So we were just dealing with strategic issues for the municipality, and one of them ought to be, and I'm sure will be, this planning regime that they're bringing forward to circumvent community engagement, circumvent local planning, quite frankly, and have more of the cost be borne by the general taxpayer as opposed to the development and the developer, who stands to benefit significantly from this proposed direction that they're taking. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but we will make sure that the appropriate noise is made. So Councillor Ferguson kind of asked earlier, are we making that case? Absolutely, we will be making that case. No further questions on that. I'll just put myself on the speakers list for comments.
Thank
you. I will turn to Councillor Clark for a second time, and then we had Councillor Stanko, and I think Councillor Pearson, you indicated as well. So Councillor Clark, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have one comment, and then I was going to provide comments. Sorry, one question, and then I was going to provide comments. Do you want me to do it that way, or?
I prefer that we receive the presentation and take our staff out of the equation at the appropriate time, and then we will have recommendations that we're going to debate and discuss, and that's the appropriate time for comments.
It's an excellent idea, keeping the politics out of it with our staff.
Thank you.
I have this bill is incredibly technical, but I have one question for our staff in terms of after you read the bill and what's in the bill, and you think of how it will now proceed if it was approved, will this bill speed up the approval process with municipalities in Ontario for planning applications?
Thank you. Tiffany?
Through the chair, I see Anita put on her camera. So,
through the chair, I will tackle that question. I think after reviewing it and after having lots of internal discussions, I think we're all sort of the same opinion that it will not speed things up, and really, I don't believe it will also lead to increasing housing supply or affordability. What we see a lot of, and I think it's been touched on already, there's for lack of a better term, a lot of speculation that happens, right? So we get a lot of official plan amendments, a lot of zoning bylaw amendments. Staff spend a lot of time working with applicants, working with communities to come to a concept and implementation tools to implement a proposal, and then we don't see anything come of it. So, that I think that's a big issue, and so approvals don't always equate to building permits, which is challenging. I think we've already talked about it in terms of making the decision making being transferred from council to the tribunal. That doesn't necessarily speed up things at all. I mean, if we needed a couple of extra months to work through one small issue, we can take that time to get to a recommendation that staff would support, that the applicant could accept, and that council could also support as well. So those few extra months up front in working on an official plan amendment or a zoning would negate needing to go to the tribunal, which could take a little bit of extra time. I think, in terms of making it better, I think, we've touched on a number of things already today, that the limiting community engagement and community consultation through these processes, reducing the ability of staff to have those opportunities to negotiate with the applicant to make things better. I think staff spend a lot of time behind the scenes doing that exact work, right? Meeting with applicants, doing redesigns, talking about how, what kind of landscaping we could do, what can the building look like. Those are all the kinds of conversations that happen behind the scenes. And I think all of those conversations and negotiations lead to a much better outcome. And I think that will be lost through all of this. And I think we touched on it as well in terms of possibly more denials that would have to come forward of a project that would be a really good project that would just need a few little bit of extra months, or maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's 8 months, but it would be a much better project. Those projects may not come to fruition, or would then be transferred to the tribunal in order for them to make a decision. And I think that would mean a lot of premature decisions on possibly some really, really good applications that would actually help make things more affordable and would also lead to increase in housing supply. So I think, I don't think, in my opinion, and I think I can speak for others that are here, is that it will not make things better.
Can I ask a supplemental, Mr. Mayor? I'm the council's commissioner on the Niagara Escarpment Commission. And so when we're dealing with permitted areas and planning areas, do you have an understanding as to how this would affect the Niagara Escarpment area?
Through the chair to the councillor, I think it wouldn't affect their roles and responsibilities. But what will happen is, again, it gets back to the timelines and what can we do within the timelines that we have. And part of the concern is that sometimes, we need to work with those outside agencies, whether it's a Conservation Authority or the Niagara Escarpment Commission on these applications. And so the pressure would be on them to be able to provide a fulsome review as well in order to provide us with comments and us an understanding of what their position is. And the challenge will be, how do you do that within the time frame? And we keep saying the time frame is 90 days. It's not. It's actually less, right? We all have a little bit of less time because reports have to be prepared and published. So we actually don't even have 90 days in which to do this. So that would be the challenge, I think, that the agencies and that city staff will come across.
And can I offer a example? So in Ward 9, we have a rather large karst formation that expands across the ward. We have many natural features, streams, waterfalls, as you see behind me. When we're getting planning applications for those, the staff and I have always asked for geotechnical studies, hydrogeological studies, because we don't understand the impact of the proposal on the natural environment, but we also don't understand if the flood planning area or where the karsts are, if there's going to be upwelling. So how will it, because those studies take a bit of time. I'm assuming then, based on this, that they're going to be rushed studies and we may not catch the negative implication of a development application. Is that a fair assessment or concern?
Through the chair to the councillor, I think the concern would be that staff wouldn't have time to review the information to make a recommendation. So that if we didn't have the time, or if, sometimes we need peer reviewers as well. There are studies that are outside of the professional capabilities that we have on staff. So we need other assistance. So the concern would be that we make that premature decision to say no and recommend denial. We could use holding provisions. That's also what we've discussed, as well as a possible solution where we think it's something that we can support, but there's still some additional review and additional studies that would be needed to make a very firm recommendation. So I think depending on the situation, I think there's a couple of scenarios that could come into play. I don't think that we would make a recommendation if we didn't feel comfortable that the studies were comprehensive. So again, it would either be perhaps a denial, or we would have to use a holding provision to require additional studies.
And does the act allow us to, sorry, Mr. Mayor, does the act allow us to do that? And that's my last question, sir.
Thank you.
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, we do have that authority under the Planning Act to apply a holding provision. We also have official plan policies which lay out the circumstances in which we can use a holding provision.
Okay, thank you for those answers and questions, important ones for sure. Councillor Danko, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the presentation, there was discussion on that this act is focusing 100% on approvals and nothing to ensure that what is approved actually gets built. So through you to Ms. Singh or whomever is able to answer, it's in the report, but I just want to highlight how many potential units right now are ready to build in the city of Hamilton.
Thank you. Tiffany?
Through you, the mayor, to the councillor. I'm hoping actually if Steve's available to speak to this.
Okay.
We do have a quote
Through
in
you,
the
Mr.
report.
Mayor, it's approximately 35,000 units are based on our vacant land inventory within the city of Hamilton. So, and those units are at various, some are already zoned to other units that are designated and are working their way through the planning approvals process. And that was based on our annual reporting, I think for December 2020. We're just in the process of completing that exercise. City of Hamilton grows by about 3,000 units a year. So that equates to a 12-year supply as of December 2020 in term based on our vacant land inventory. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Danko? You're on mute, unfortunately.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just saying it seems very counterintuitive that if we have a 12-year supply of units that are already ready to build, why the province would be focusing on approvals for new supply and not making sure that what's already approved gets built. Do we have a sense of what that number is for the entire GTHA? I think I read in a report from Ryerson it was around 200,000 units, but I'm not sure.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I had seen the similar report, I believe in the large city mayor's submission to the province on the Affordable Housing Task Force. It said it was up to 250,000 units. We're in various stages of the approvals pipeline, and that would include all municipalities in Ontario. So that has been one of the issues that has at our PCO as well as other municipalities we have raised with the province, that there is a fairly significant land supply already, and that there is, and the task force report even itself noted there needs to be a way to move those from speculation or other reasons why those people aren't moving forward on those planning permissions and actually building housing dwelling units to respond to the need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it seems pretty obvious if you were actually wanting to improve and increase supply, you would focus on getting units built that are already approved. A follow-up question, there's some discussion about the refund and the 90 days or 120 days. Can I ask through you to staff specifically what happens in that 90 days? What work is required, public consultation? You know, is 90 days really 90 days, or is it actually shorter than that? And what happens in that time frame?
Through the chair to the councillor, there's a lot that happens, and maybe I'll start with the timelines. 90 days under the Act, but I think a target or a date that we sort of consider is what day does the report made public. And I think for a zoning, it's about, I think we said it was 67 days, I think. And then for a combined official plan amendment and zoning, it's about 95 days instead of 120. So there's there's time because other parts of the organization have to do their jobs as well and their responsibilities. So when an application comes in, staff have to review it. We have to deem it complete. We have to give notice on that deeming of complete, which goes out to the public. There's an internal circulation to many different groups within PED, within other parts of the organization, but also to outside agencies such as utility companies, conservation authorities. They're given a certain amount of time in which to review and provide comment back, which is roughly, I'm going to say roughly, 30 days. It's a little less, but we give a little bit of grace, understanding that a lot of organizations are busy and maybe short-staffed as well, so they may need a bit more time. And then the planner takes those comments and does a review and assessment of what are the issues, where are there conflicts, maybe everything is okay and the application could proceed, which generally does not always happen. And then those comments are then provided back to the applicant. And then the applicant has to decide what to do. And in some cases, it may just be a simple tweak to a plan. In some cases, they may need to do additional studies. Maybe their environmental impact study only did 2 seasons, but we require 3 seasons. So they'd have to go and wait to do that, those initial assessments. And that's where there's a lot of discussions and a lot of communication and coordination between city staff and the applicant to talk about what do we do next and how do we move forward. And so there's a lot of conversations, and there may be additional resubmissions that would then go back. You sort of start again. You get a resubmission, you do a circulation, you get comments, you review those comments, and you kind of go through that cycle. So generally, that's very challenging to do within a 90-day and 120 days when it comes to these applications. I think it's an important point to make is that when we do receive an official plan amendment, that's generally because there's a fundamental change that's happening. Otherwise, you would need to amend the official plan. So that really requires a higher level of scrutiny and assessment. Zonings, may not be such a significant change, but have significant impacts because you're looking at a very small, you're getting into the details of setbacks, of heights, of landscaping. So that's generally what would happen in the review of a file.
Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Mayor, if you look at the Planning Act requirements, from a day an application is received, we have 30 days to deem it complete. We then have to circulate the application, give agencies 20 days to review and comment at. So we're 50 days right there. We use 17 days prior to the public meeting. We give notice and say you can come into City Hall and see the proposed zoning bylaw amendment and official plan amendment. So that's 17 days. So now you're at 67. And then between planning committee and council, where the actual decision is rendered, that's 8 days. So 67 and 8 is 75 days. That would then leave the planner, the applicant, as well as and the engineers, other staff, 15 days to review all of the information, to negotiate any changes with the applicant, and then write a staff report. That is, we occasionally can do that for very unique projects where it's pretty straightforward, where they're simply adding one use or we're tweaking a regulation. Effectively, it's a minor variance that's going to planning committee instead of committee of adjustment. But it is almost impossible in order to do a comprehensive review, assess the feedback from the community if they have issues on grading, tree preservation, karst, natural features, traffic, get the applicant to make changes to the proposal to respond to those issues, and then bring forward an application that has been well thought out and to count such that council can make a decision on day 90. And then it's further frustrated is depending on the date of the application and the date of the council meeting, in the 90 days may fall in between two council meetings. So suddenly, instead of having 90 days, you might only have 83 days based on the schedule or on the summer recess. And that's another point. The legislation doesn't make any consideration during extraordinary events, such as during an election year, in terms of when there may not be a council meeting. So we could end up with a situation where people are applying, and just because of scheduling, they're all entitled to refunds because there are no council meetings to make a decision. That's why we suggested if they look at the Heritage Act, it recognizes all of those circumstances. So the exact, this government, the current government adopted the changes to the Heritage Act. They made those provisions into that system, but for some reason they didn't seem to give us the same courtesy under the proposed changes to the Planning Act. My apologies for taking so long, but
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Complicated issue. Thank you,
No,
Mr. Danko.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that. 'Cause I just think it was important to highlight that even though it sounds like a long period of time, the bulk of the work that our staff do is done in a very compressed period already. And it makes it almost impossible when we have arbitrary deadlines.
That's time for you.
That's time for me. I have a couple questions on the building code. So I can go back on as a third time now or when we get to the report.
Third time now, because we're going to stay with questions, but
Okay.
I'm going to hop over to Councillor Pearson, and I'll come back to you. Councillor Pearson.
No, mine's the comments, Mr. Mayor. I put on for comments when we get there. I think I'll be first for that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll make sure that you are. Councillor Wilson, questions?
Thank you. A single question, if I could, through you to staff. I'm receiving emails just asking clarification on what does Bill 109 mean for this council's decision on the urban boundary, and what might it mean in the future on any decisions with respect to the urban boundary? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Steve?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the proposed changes to the Act will allow the minister to refer the city's grids municipal comprehensive review implementing official plan amendment to the OLT. And the minister can either seek advice from the OLT in terms of whether or not they feel that the city's OPA is compliant with the growth plan, or the OLT can hold a hearing, and it would be effectively a full Ontario Land Tribunal hearing in which witnesses can make that. The OLT can hear from witnesses, whether it's from the municipality, the province, landowners, or other interested groups, and then the OLT can either approve the city's OPA as adopted by council. The OLT can either rewrite the OPA as adopted by council based on whatever the OLT determines represents good planning, or the OLT, depending if it can give advice back to the minister to make changes to the OPA based on what the minister hears. So essentially, it'll be a full urban boundary expansion hearing in which would hear, and based on past experiences could take up to 15 weeks, and all landowners and other interested parties can participate, and then the OLT can make a decision whether or not to let the OPA stand or to modify the OPA, and that could result in one or more areas being added to the urban area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just seek clarification from the chief planner. The scenario that you've just painted for us, lengthy, costly, that is for the future. Is that applied to this council's position on the urban boundary now?
Thank you. Steve?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding is that the minister has already indicated in the media that he plans on referring the OPA to the OLT for a hearing, and it'll be a full hearing in which landowners, interest groups, third parties can seek status at that hearing, and it will be a full contested hearing on whether or not the city should expand the urban boundary, and if so, by how much. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Danko, third time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I really do appreciate the time. A couple questions on the revisions to the building code. So council will recall that we endorsed direction from the city of Waterloo, I think it was, to improve efficiency standards in the building code. So despite the fact that through this act, the province is modifying provisions to the building code, they're not making any changes for climate or efficiency standards through the code.
Thank you. Steve?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as my understand it, what's being contemplated through the changes that the province announced are not, but there was a separate earlier ERO posting that sought to align the Ontario Building Code with the National Building Code. And we provided comments encouraging through those changes that they look at enhancements as it relates to climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, and operational efficiencies of the building. The primary changes that the province announced through this suite of changes would be to allow mass timber construction to 12 stories in height, which from a sustainable perspective can be a positive development. But the other change was to only require one stairwell in a building, which our fire chief has identified concerns with and would want additional details before we could accept that. And then there were some other regulations in there to allow phased occupancy of tall buildings. But as it relates to specific measures around climate change mitigation and energy efficiency, that's not included in this suite of announcements or changes by the province. Thank you.
Thank you. On the changes, the recommendation for one entrance for a 4 to 6 story building, I saw the comments from the fire chief explicitly stating that this is not recommended. Would you or staff be able to elaborate on specifically why that? I mean, it's pretty obvious, but
my understanding in speaking with the fire chief with the concern through you, Mr. Mayor, was that if the fire actually affected the stairwell and there was only one stairwell, then the people in the upper stories may not be able to leave the building in a safe fashion. You know, the primary fire chief's concern is about protection or loss of human life, and that there was a risk that there was a potential increased risk in the event that the fire affected this only single stairwell for the upper story occupants. And for that reason, the fire chief felt that the current standards should remain, or that there be further elaboration consideration on this matter before making any changes. Thank you.
Thank you. And final question is on the occupancy of partially completed super tall buildings. I'm not sure if this would apply to Hamilton. I didn't see the definition of what super tall is, but I'm just wondering how that would actually work. So would that be after substantial completion, or would you basically move into a construction site? And why would they possibly think that this is a good idea?
And is this related to Bill 109?
Yes.
Steve?
I think I would defer to the building department staff to respond. I believe Mr. Van Rielt's can assist.
Thanks, Steve, and through the mayor, thank you for providing the opportunity to comment on this. I brought Dio Ortez, our manager of building engineering, online here as well. Also joined the conversation. But essentially, we have buildings that are larger and larger and higher. This allows opportunities to occupy the lower stories as the upper stories are being finished. I think currently we allow occupancy of unfinished buildings if the roof has been completed, but this new proposal will allow the roof to be not completed and it still occupy the lower stories as the upper part of the building is being completed. Do you want to add more to that?
Okay.
No. I think your answer was exactly what.
Thank you. Councillor Danko.
Thank you. That's my final question. And why would you want to legislate that people can move into buildings when the roof isn't finished? I have no idea, but there it is. Thank you.
Attention to detail, I think, is wanting in all of this, quite frankly. Councillor Clark. And then we'll go to receiving the presentation, and then we'll go to actually the recommendation in item 4.1.
Super. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have one question left. In your last statement, bang on. With regards to the Election Act and the lame duck council process. So I know that this bill will unlikely be proclaimed until after the municipal election. But for future councils, if they experience a lame duck council process, the bill, I don't think, contemplates that. So you could potentially have 5 months with an inability to approve something. How would we deal with that?
I think that's kind of into the clerk's realm. Andrea, if you're on the, I see you are there.
Through the mayor. So I am preparing a communication for lame duck description anyway. For next week, I was going to circulate it. So the restricted acts under a lame duck is if you have a council membership of less than 75% after the nomination period. So following that, the restrictions are on the appointment or removal from office, any officer of the municipality, the hiring or dismissal of any employees of the municipality, the disposition of any real or personal property of the municipality, which has a value of exceeding $50,000 at the time of disposal, and making any expenditures or incurring any other liability which exceeds $50,000. So staff will have to look at what is being proposed through the planning application. Typically, a lot of planning decisions can still be made because they don't fall within these 4 restrictions. But again, staff will have to make that determination.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised that you're ahead of us again. But if we could perhaps put our mind to that, I just want to make sure that there isn't another unintended consequence as a result of the bill. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'll say, can I take a motion to receive the presentation? First off, moved by Councillor Pearson, second by Councillor Clark. And you'll need to vote electronically to receive that. Thank you. And all good, important questions. That's why we wanted to have a special council meeting, so that we can make the appropriate noise at Queen's Park. And anyone need to do a thumbs up?
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you. Thumbs up there.
That carries 11-0.
Thank you very much. And then Councillor Nan, a motion to put item 4.1 on the floor. I think we've already done that, have we not? Or we're in committee.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, you wanted me to put item 4.1? So that's for me.
I think we're good. It's on the, yeah, so we need to put it on the floor. So I think that's already done by virtue of our moving into committee of the whole, quite frankly. Madam Clerk, am I correct on that?
We'll be receiving the presentation, and then you need a mover and a seconder to get the report on the floor.
Right.
So we've done receipt and moving to report 4.1. Mover and seconder, please. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Clark. And now we're open.
You kind of took the chair away from me there. I wasn't going down.
My apologies. I thought that's what you're asking.
Okay, though. Yeah, but you're on the right track. So mover and a seconder, and then debate. And so I do recall Councillor Pearson indicating she wanted to be first on making comments. So Councillor Pearson, go ahead. And then the speakers list is open on debate. But we're not asking questions anymore. We're actually now dealing with the item and hopefully resolving the issue going forward. So,
Mr. Mayor, and I don't want to belabor the meeting because I know everybody has other places to go to, and I've actually numbered. So first, I just want to make a point. I think we're all struck by in awe by these suggestions coming by from the province at such a late hour. But I do want to commend our staff because, we received monthly reports at our planning committee meeting, and our staff are catching up on outstanding planning applications and site plan applications, et cetera. You can see the reductions every month in those lists. So I do commend our staff. They're doing everything they can. I have to say that it's really unfortunate because the people that are going to be affected are the people that won't even know this is happening. And it will eliminate, Mr. Mayor, if I have to say, I've had tremendous response from developers in my ward, whether big time or small time, whatever they are. I give an example where I have one that was pursuing a 4-story apartment building in a residential neighborhood. I expressed the concerns of the neighborhood, suggested coming back with 3 because one of the houses that he tore down was a 3-story farmhouse. And I thought, well, that's in keeping with the neighborhood. And he's gone back to the drawing board. His planner's gone back. But in this scenario, I don't think he would even give me the light of day to say, you know what, I'll work with you, councillor, and work with the neighborhood, because he won't have to. And this is the frustration I think we're all going to experience going forward. To me, this is, I'm going to use an analogy. It's a sledgehammer using what a fly swatter could solve. And I don't think we even needed to fly swatter in Hamilton because our staff are doing a tremendous job. But at the end of the day, Mr. Mayor, I'll cut it short. The taxpayers are the ones that are going to pay this. They are the ones that are not even aware of it. And I don't know how this helps new home buyers. My own daughter and son-in-law looking to buy a house. Tell me how they're going to afford it when now they're looking at the cost of a house and the increase in taxes because they're going to pay for other developments. Again, it's a very, very unfair process going forward, and I'm going to leave it at that, sir.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as I'm apt to try and do, I respect the Legislative Assembly, I respect the office of the Premier, and I respect their authority. It concerns me that this bill has already been referred to the Standing Committee of the Legislative Assembly, and that they're going to do clause by clause on April 13th. The ERO, the Environmental Registry, shows that comment period ends April 29th, which means that they could go to 3rd reading and pass it in the Legislative Assembly very quickly. The bill itself is technical, so technical in nature that I suspect most residents will not know about it. Councillor Pearson's correct. And some may not be able to comprehend the language because it's really written by lawyers. And it's very confusing unless you're a planner or a lawyer. Most lay people cannot understand it. The chances of this government getting back into office is really high. We need to understand that. When I'm looking at some of the polling, and the most recent polling that I saw was 338 Canada, they're projecting a Conservative majority by 73%. They're projecting the odds of winning the most seats for the Conservatives at 98%. So the likelihood of this bill passing and getting a royal assent and proclamation is high. The real challenge that I'm seeing in this bill is the unintended consequences. So we heard Councillor Danko talk about all of the housing that is in the process, in the hopper for the next 12 years. And it's a significant number. Now imagine the minister approving all of that housing in short order and the developers now proceeding to build. Imagine the increase in price because of the increase of demand of services for contractors and materials, which subsequently will increase the housing price. So the unintended consequence is severe on this bill. And if all of those houses are approved with short thrift and the builders can proceed to build, it's not going to lower the housing price. And on top of that, you have rising inflation. So I understand and I commend the government for trying to find the ways and means to speed up the planning approval process. But the challenge with an expedited bill without real, authentic, legitimate consultation with municipalities who have all of that experience, the risk of unintended consequences is very high. And so I am concerned, quite frankly, Mr. Mayor, and I don't mean to be negative. I can't see, I honestly cannot see in clause by clause that this bill will be changed dramatically. And I can't see that this is going to become an election issue because it's so technical. So we may find ourselves in the new year having to deal with this bill and with a long advocacy process in terms of balancing the Planning Act back to the balance that it had. And I think that's important. I think it's questionable the way the bill is written, where the minister can defer things to the Ontario Lands Tribunal. The bill is written and it says the Ontario Lands Tribunal may hold a hearing. It does not say that they shall hold a hearing. So if the minister doesn't ask them to hold a hearing, they may not, but they may choose not to. And with a lot of applications coming before them, they may choose to begin the expediting decisions. So there's a host of unintended consequences. I understand the intention. I think it is authentic. I think they really are trying to help increase the supply of housing with the hopes of lowering the housing price. But increasing the supply of housing is not the only thing that increases the price of housing. So I'm a little bit frustrated. I'm a little bit in awe of what is happening before us. It's kind of that shock and awe that you're getting hit with. But I'm not sure. I think I am sure. I'm pretty sure there's not going to be any changes to this bill through clause by clause. And this bill will be approved prior to the election and the visit to the Lieutenant Governor's office for the writ. So those are my questions, or my comments, and I do want to sincerely thank our planning staff, our legal staff, for reviewing this act and taking those clauses and looking as to how they apply to us, and thinking of that and coming back with recommendations and a comment to the province. Unfortunately, I don't think our comments will be heeded. Those are all my comments, Mr. Mayor. I really thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just on the election and the political side of all of this, and I think we've all agreed with our comments already today that that's exactly what this is ahead of a provincial election. Just on my colleague's comments just now, I would take a contradictory opinion on whether or not it be an election issue. He is bang on. It's very, very complicated. But I don't think we're going to be the only municipality that highlights the things that we're highlighting here today, the concerns. And again, kudos to Tiffany, who on 2 slides takes that complicated message and really sums it up. So, as direction to staff, maybe look at a way to communicate these 2 slides that simplify where the issues are in some sort of public notification. And that's the slide that had the consequences from the changes proposed and the gaps in information slide that followed. Really great work to sum it up. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have a feeling this issue isn't going to go away. I think it might just snowball, and you could kind of see from the, you know, the public interest in following Hamilton's lead on the urban boundary debate. I mean, that was kind of a complicated issue too, and certainly the participation locally and then across, the greater Golden Horseshoe area. Significantly tells us that there are folks paying attention to planning, and there are folks that want to keep planning as local as possible for all the obvious reasons and the good arguments that we heard today. So I know we won't be the only municipality with these very similar concerns and the recommendations that are before us now, but it is pressure. Ultimately, it's going to be pressure on our planning department among all the other municipal planning departments who right now have resource issues, and there's not a hiring pool that is sufficient to fill the gaps as it stands now, let alone once this business gets into play. There's pressure on this and future councils to try to do things a little differently, and I think try to figure out the discombobulated nature of this housing accelerator scheme that is part of the Bill 109 plan. Pressure on the taxpayers ultimately, because growth ain't paying for growth so much as the taxpayers paying for the more homes for everyone. And I think that's a piece that is going to be simplified in the message going forward that might create the biggest noise and might get more of our citizens wanting to understand this political ploy a little more clearly going forward. And the one thing that I don't believe anybody mentioned yet, but I did see building staff had made some comments, but there may actually be public safety concerns through all of this because, when you're rushing major projects or mid-sized projects through a process that is designed, especially through the building code, to protect the public, ultimately in the end users, those who will be working or living in these buildings. So I wouldn't be surprised at the very least if questions arise on, is this rushed bill leaving us open in the future for, rushed work that could lead to shortcuts in the project? I'm not saying it will happen, but it's maybe part of a conversation going forward as well. So I support what's here. It's really unfortunate, and especially when, as a three-term planning counselor and a former chair on a few occasions, it's very clear our local public is part, not wants to be, but is a big part of planning processes. And this isn't going to be something that I think is widely embraced. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I see myself on the speakers list at this moment. So Councillor Nan, if you would take the chair, and I understand Councillor Clark's notion on what they're trying to achieve. I just think they're going about it exactly the wrong way, and this is not good planning. We pride ourselves on good planning to make sure that we have well thought out, well planned communities that stand the test of time. And this is really designed to negate all of that. It's designed to negate local community participation in good planning and public consultation. It's designed to drive most of this to the Ontario Land Tribunal, which has little or no local connection or context to the local planning issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So good planning is local planning. It is not planning by province. It is not planning by regulation from the province. It is actually local input, local community understanding, local planning technicians that make sure that the issues that are important for our community that need to be addressed are addressed. What the province does not talk about is the regulations that they're responsible for that in fact slows down the approvals process. And there are many. In fact, probably many more on the provincial side than there are on the municipal side, whether it's environmental assessments or water management issues, you name it. The list is, acres long. But given that, to simplify this even more, this is really putting the burden of growth on existing taxpayers. So we've said all along, growth needs to pay for growth. So if you are developing a plot of land, your plot of land needs to cover the cost of future amenities and necessities that are going to come with that, not the existing taxpayers that have already paid for the growth that they've engineered or been part of. And so now we're doubling down on existing taxpayers to pay for the kind of growth that developers obviously want, and in many respects we want as well, but in a controlled and very managed, organized way. This negates all of that. This is bad planning. This is bad policy coming forward. The intention might be good in terms of trying to deal with affordability, but I don't see the connection to affordability when it comes to supply. And the supply and demand theory doesn't apply to housing when you have so many other factors that come into play that affects the affordability issue. And the primary one, that people tend to fluff off and people tend to enjoy, is that we have dramatically low interest rates. That's the main driver for why people are paying more and are able to pay more, because they're able to pay more on a monthly basis based on the low interest rates. That's the main driver. And in the absence of fixing that, prices are going to continue to escalate. Supply isn't the big issue. It's an issue that we need to address, and clearly that is being addressed by virtue of the approvals that we've already given for units that can be built today. But the reality is that that this policy and this drive towards having a banker make determinations on what good planning is absolutely wrong. It's just wrong, and I think people will understand that. So I'm fully supportive. I'm not going to be too kind to this province, and the province in many respects has been very good to the city of Hamilton in terms of benefits that they've provided. But this is a long-term policy change that is going to have a dramatic impact on how communities engage, how we do good planning in our community, how we not drive up the costs for development, which in fact this will do. Because if you're not only driving up the cost for our planning staff and our taxpayers, we need more planners to be able to to accommodate this. You're also driving up the cost in terms of the Ontario Land Tribunal and litigation that comes out of all of this. And so unintended consequences are significant, and they're real, and they need to be addressed. And I think the only way that we can get their attention is that I only know, just be fair, I only know of one municipality that on a regular basis says that the Planning Act is broken. I don't agree with that. I think the Planning Act and the planning regime can be improved, as it always is, as we have done in the city of Hamilton by virtue of that very comprehensive list of planning changes that we have made and timeline approvals that we've engineered over the last 10 years. But it's not broken. It is not broken. So, but if you're a developer, I mean, it's an easy argument to make that, I could build more houses if things were easier. Well, let's just throw the planning book away and let people build whatever they want, and we will get lots of buildings, but we won't get good planning. So I am stuck with making sure that we impress upon this government that the unintended consequences for this are long-term and are not bearable by local municipalities and shouldn't be bearable by local taxpayers on behalf of. And I'm no enemy of developers. I embrace development. I embrace developers. I understand their frustrations from time to time. But I think this is blowing it way out of context, and certainly swinging the pendulum way too far to the benefit of unplanned, under-resourced, lack of community consultation processes that is going to provide for us not good long-term sustainable planning. So I obviously fully support the recommendations, and I'll certainly speak to these issues when we have our media advisory. And I would hope and think that Ontario big city mayors have weighed in. And I know all municipalities, save a couple, are doing the same thing that we're doing right now, exploring the impacts of this and the unintended consequences, and making their feelings known sooner rather than later. And doing this just ahead of an election process, not a whole lot of logic attached to this, in my humble opinion, because now you have every council and every mayor, save except a couple, upset with a government that on an issue that they should not have raised at this point in time, and they should find a different way of managing rather than this heavy hammer that really drives the entire planning process up to the provincial level, which is not going to be good planning. So anyway, enough said. I will make appropriate comments, and of course I'll always be diplomatic because I understand that the government is the government, and they do have authority, but they need to understand what the unintended consequences are here, and they are significant.
Thank you,
Thank
Mayor.
you for that.
Past your time and much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for the latitude. I
Turns back to
appreciate
you.
it. Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question on recommendation C, if now is the appropriate time.
Yeah, on the recommendations, for sure. Yep.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Robichaud. Earlier, Mr. Robichaud, I'd asked you a question about what does that exactly this bill, assuming it gains royal assent, mean for this council's decision and our OPA on the urban boundary. And I just want to make sure I understand the intent of C. If you is recommendation C saying that once Bill 109 receives that assent, then we will respond in a way that amends our OP and our rural OP to reflect that bill?
Steve?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, to clarify, the intent of recommendation C or recommendation C will speak to the current official plan policies that relate to complete applications. We currently have a list of what is required as a complete submission, reports and studies, so we may have to broaden that list of the complete applications. Because the province is clarifying the language around complete plans, we need to revisit the official plan policies relating to that. And then the third element is where the Planning Act allows municipalities to have an alternative notification procedure for notice of public meetings. We currently use 17 days. We may need to revisit that as well and make recommendations to Planning Committee and Council should that 17 days be reduced, all in response to those proposed changes. As it relates to the GRID's MCR OPA process, that would be separate and outside of the recommendation C. It will not, in terms of Council's decision on the no urban boundary expansion, that draft OPA will be coming to Planning Committee on May 17th for consideration, at which time Council can either approve, modify, or refer back that draft OPA to staff. But recommendation C does not in any way alter, affect, or modify in any way Council's decision in terms of the growth management strategy and the issue of an urban boundary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Planner. That was the assurance I was looking for from you, because I didn't want it to do anything in C to preclude our ability to exercise our responsibilities in that appeal. Mr. Mayor, to your comments and to the comments of my other colleagues, it's been a long time now where we have had governments of every stripe when there are issues of complexity gripping our communities to propose legislation under really simple terms. And this is one of them, more homes for everyone, when in fact, to your point of unintended consequences, this is not what this is about. You know, I understand that we have families. We have families with older children. I met them on the campaign in 2018, where they have adult children either living in their basements or living in substandard housing, and they worry about the ability of those kids to either get into the housing market or get into a better form of housing, whether that be rental or otherwise. And as is the case, rather than talk about the very many threads and forces that have gotten us to where we are, we wish to respond to those sentiments with, I think one of my colleagues said, a sledgehammer or a simplicity of a response that years from now we will find regrettably, has exacerbated the very issue in which we were seeking to resolve. And we've seen this for a long time, whether it be the downloading of social housing, right? Getting people from welfare to work. We're dealing often with these policy actions, the legacy of those very, very complicated issues, because we sought very simple, politically catchy responses. And now we have a homelessness crisis. All of these things often take time to reveal themselves, but they certainly do at the end of the day. And this will be one of them. Mr. Mayor, we have finally publicly been talking about how development at our headwaters impacts the very bottom and the health of our urban streams, the health of Coots, the health of our bay. We're moving in the direction of watershed planning. And as one of my colleagues said, we need those detailed studies that often take time to understand what is going to be the impact on those creeks, what is going to be the impact on the karst, what is going to be the impact of that development at the headwaters on our aging infrastructure. This kind of simplistic move puts all of that progress, that recognition into jeopardy. And so my question to you, Mr. Mayor, that the public may not understand this, and I don't think the public is frankly going to have much sympathy on whether a lot of mayors, frankly, no disrespect, get together and oppose this, because it's always been true to form that we pit one level of government often against the other. I think it is incumbent upon us, and I know you will be doing this in the media conference that follows this, to talk about those unintended consequences, that this is a form of downloading, that this will have implications very immediately on your taxes, your property taxes. This may have health and safety issues. One of my colleagues, through his line of questioning, revealed you can move into a condo now or apartment with no roof. I'd like to know what we, as a community, we're spending $30,000 to promote our economic development plan. What ways and means what can we use as a corporation to try and help people to understand what are these unintended consequences? So that is my question through you to perhaps Mr. Grant and to my colleagues.
Thank you, and that's time for you. And Matthew, are you dialed in?
He may not be.
We'll just wait a second and see if he is. And maybe Jeanette Smith, in terms of our communication strategy going forward. Obviously, the media advisory is one. Yep, or Jen Racine.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Jen Racine is on for communications, and I'll pass it over to her to speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you both. Apologies, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, next steps after today's meeting. Our plan is to hold a media briefing where yourself, Mr. Mayor, as well as Steve Robichaud and Jason Thorne will act as a spokesperson panel for the media briefing. We have invited the media to come. Members of council may have seen our media advisory that went out this morning, and we have heard from a few media who are planning to join us and take that opportunity to ask some questions about today's meeting. We also have a media release that has been drafted. We'll just be looking for a bit of feedback from Steve and Jason on that release. And our plan is to send that out to the media just prior to the briefing so they have that release ahead of the opportunity to ask questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I certainly appreciate those efforts, but the only way politically this is going to be won, and the only way in which we are going to be held accountable probably in the next term, is clearly articulating visually or otherwise what this is going to mean for your neighborhoods, what this is going to mean for Councillor Nan's neighborhood, because of the change in the development charges and the parkland fees in an area of this community which is already starving for parkland and recreational space. and then she's going to have to wear that. What this is going to mean for heritage communities, whether it be in Waterdown or Ancaster, when a developer can push through something, intended or otherwise, because they can, and what that means for heritage in your neighborhood. So this is significant for a whole bunch of reasons, and I think it's we have to be able to clearly articulate on an ongoing basis why this matters. Thank you.
Yeah, and today is the start of that, and I'm sure there's more to be had there. So we'll continue on with direction from council thereafter in terms of how we're going to continue to get that message across. Councillor Jackson.
Mayor Eisenberger, thank you. I will be supporting the staff professional recommendation here today. I have some concerns in some of the bullet points in the presentation down the road, but I'll save that for another day because there'll be more reports coming in May, I understand, specifically to the May 17th Planning Committee meeting. I just want to reiterate, Mr. Mayor, what I did in my questioning, preamble to my questioning about staff resources. Chief Planner Robichaud is very much aware, and I'm singling out these small examples. That if these small examples are lingering, then the larger examples, of course, are going to linger longer or will, by the owners of those properties and the developer applications, they'll be far less patient in most cases. I've got a situation on Rymal Road, Mr. Mayor. Developer wants to get his 41 townhomes, two-story townhomes approved, been at it for a couple of years. He's on a second planner. Unfortunately, continuity was lost for whatever reasons. And it's been a bit of frustration, and this would be just a lovely development. And that's one example of, for whatever reasons, and in all respect of the planning department and their talent and their resources, there's one example. Another one is a commercial plaza has been waiting almost 15 months to get a simple freestanding sign approved. Again, back and forth communication. For whatever reason, it still has not been approved and has not been constructed. So I use these small examples, Mr. Mayor, to say that if staffing resources, and I know General Manager Thorne responded to my question on this issue, I don't want to lose sight of this. And if there needs to be specifically, I know he spoke to across multi-departmental are involved with planning applications, but planning and in the community, the perception is the planning division are the quarterback of the applications. And ultimately it's planning that brings the final recommendations and reports for approval or denial to the application to the committee with a host of course, consultations. It's in that area that I want to provide greater support down the road if I can. Two other quick points, Mr. Mayor. Whatever happens with the province of Ontario in the next 60 days or so to June 2nd, I want to have with my colleagues an honest conversation about intensification. I keep hearing this term gentle intensification is what neighborhoods and communities desire, Mr. Mayor. To me, that's such an oxymoron. I honestly don't understand the term. I think I get where some of my colleagues are going with that term, but you know what? The LRT has now been approved, and everybody was rejoicing over the fact that finally new massive development will occur and should properly occur along the LRT corridor. And I'm hearing of applications along the proposed corridor in terms of density and intensification, and I'm hearing pushback and I'm hearing backlash. And I get it. I understand from existing neighborhoods, but I just need to have an honest, open conversation, either one-on-one with my colleagues, Mr. Mayor, possibly in a huddled area, a huddled group of 2 or 3, that I can just pick the brains of my colleagues of gentle intensification, because folks, the intensification issue is not going away, and I'm seeing it across various wards already in the city. I've got 2 applications that are going to be forthcoming soon in my ward, and I have been able, Mr. Mayor, to keep the developers at bay, working with my office, maybe because of the longevity of my office. I've been grateful to the mutual respect back and forth that they've held off for another community meeting. But I know ultimately it's not necessarily going to be overall favorable. And lastly, Mr. Mayor, maybe down the road as well, from our legal department and the acting solicitor Zabel, legal is the ones who appear at the OLT. That's what I've been taught from planning. Once council's made a decision, planning's done most of the work on the application. Legal are ultimately the ones that appear at OLT on any appeals. We're losing a whole pile, losing more than we're winning, is my perception. I would like to have down the road some legal response back from our department as to what they're experiencing at the OLT, because our community and our constituents are frustrated to hear many of these decisions, especially more favorable to the developer than against the community and the constituents of ours. I'd like to get some kind of indication from the legal department what they're experiencing. Is it that the developers bringing in just tremendously high-priced talent? Is it the fact that we're really up the creek without a paddle? I'm bothered by the fact we've got our own legal department and talent from that department there. And because I've never been to an OLT hearing, but I've heard from some of my constituents who have been participants at a couple, that they were just dismayed that they just felt the applicants' resources just seemed to at times overwhelm the cities. So anyways, Mr. Mayor, I just had to get all those comments on the table, please. And overall, though, I'll support this direction for now. Thank you.
Thank you. And since you raised it, can we have staff clarify who goes to the OLT? It's my understanding is predominantly planning staff that are going to the OLT to hear these issues. Can we get a clarity on that, Jason?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So legal takes the lead on the files. They will typically call planning evidence from a city planner, or in some cases an outside planner, and then depending on the nature of what's being discussed and debated, there may be others as well. Engineers, technical experts, transportation planning is sometimes called as witness, so it depends on the nature of the application being discussed. I would just quickly note to Councillor Jackson's question, we were asked a similar question at Planning Committee, and legal is developing a report with an update in terms of recent decisions, how many applications we are seeing, as well as some commentary on some of the trends we're seeing at the OLT. So I believe that is either at the next April Planning Committee meeting or the first one in May, but the Planning Committee did request a report along those lines, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Councillor Nan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just final comments and likely reiterating what many of my colleagues have already said around the table. Clearly an unnecessary and unfair overreach on a fast track to approval, and I agree with the excellent summary points brought forward by staff in the report, the presentation, and the responses to the questions earlier. And I really do want to say thank you publicly for your excellent work today. I'm not optimistic that the province is going to change course with this systematic and policy attack on local decision-making and city building. They seem to be very determined to steamroll this path through. However, I would agree that there is actually a lot of public interest and engagement on this bill. Concerns about impairing affordability, leading to unsafe conditions, having a negative impact on the environment, and doing nothing to actually address the increasing rates of homelessness that municipalities are actually struggling with doing. I agree that other cities will be advocating consistently, as we will, on the municipal concerns, especially that these changes are going to lead to further entrenching regressive taxation policies instead of having growth actually pay for the cost of growth. If the province did want to dramatically impact supply, then their overreach should have been focused on mechanisms of accountability by ensuring those approved applications were actually on track to being built. That's it. I'm in favor of the recommendations before us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we have a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. And we're going to turn to a vote now. For those of you that are on the call, please turn your videos on so we know you're there. And the vote is up. Anyone need to do a manual vote? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Councillor Nan? Oh, got it. Councillor Partridge. Is she there?
Not showing on the screen at the moment.
Okay. That
And thank you
carries
for-
10 to nothing.
Thank you. Thank you for the very important discussion. You can understand why we wanted to bring this to council sooner rather than later so that we can have a good, strong, firm recommendation going forward that we can bring to the province of Ontario. I'm going to turn to Councillor Nan for a confirming bylaw on this, please. So I think you have a motion. If not, make one up.
So we don't need to have committee rise from the whole and report?
Yeah, we probably do that too. Yeah. So
Okay, well, I move that, and it's seconded by Councillor Pearson.
thank you. And all in favor of that? One electronic vote as well. And everyone's able. This is good. Thumbs up from Councillor Nan.
Okay. That carries 10 to nothing.
And then the confirming bylaw, Councillor Nan.
That bill number 22-067 be passed and that the corporate seal be affixed thereto, and that the bylaw be numbered and be signed by the mayor and the city clerk to read as follows: 067 to confirm the proceedings of city council. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Clark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any comments on the bill? If not, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Anyone needing to abstain? I don't recall. Thumbs up from Councillor Nan.
And that carries 10 nothing.
And we need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by everybody else, including Councillor Pearson. All in favor? Last responsibility for voting at this meeting. Thumbs up from Councillor Nan.
Thanks for the opportunity, Mr. Mayor.
And yeah, thank you all for your participation and good comments. It's good debate, and you know it's important.
Thank you for
all.
calling the meeting, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a good weekend.
And that carries 10 nothing.
Thank you.
You too, Mr. Mayor and everyone.
Thank you.